Welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Today is all about answering some of your questions. So thanks very much for sending them in and keep them coming. We've been quite sports bike heavy over the last few videos, haven't we? A lot of GSX-R stuff, but GSX-Rs have obviously struck a chord with a lot of people and it's still a hugely loved bike. But we'll talk about a few more general questions here. So let's start it off with a question from Kyle Patton. Thanks very much. Thoughts on the upcoming ZX-R400 or ZX-4RR? Well, it's an exciting prospect, isn't it? I don't think that anyone of my age or anyone who kind of loved bikes in the late 80s and early 90s, they can't fail to get excited about the thought of one of those bikes because it conjures up memories of those great little pocket rockets of the past. So you had the Honda, you had CBR 400RRs, you had NC30s and NC35s, you had Kawasaki with ZX-R 400, Suzuki had the GSX-R 400RR and SP versions, you had the Yamaha FZR 400RR and SP, you had two strokes, RGV 250 Suzuki, KR1S Kawasaki, Honda NSR 250, Yamaha TZR 250. I mean, those bikes, a lot of them weren't officially imported into the UK, which kind of made them more special because you'd only ever see fleeting glimpses of them in magazines like PB when there'd be beautiful colour pictures of these bikes that you couldn't get hold of, and bikes which generally were higher spec than the sort of the 600s and the 1000cc bikes that officially came to the UK. So for example, that little FZR 400RR SP was far higher spec than an FZR 600 or an FZR 1000. So, you know, that made them really appealing. You know, for the kind of age riders we all were at the time, we didn't mind getting squashed up on a little bike like that, ragging the thingies off it and enjoying it in that way, because, you know, you can only ride one of those bikes one way and that's flat out, and that's what they're designed for. Bringing that bike into the current era is an interesting one. I mean, the idea is predominantly to get new riders excited about riding sporty bikes like this, like it did back in the day, because A2 licensed bikes now are a little bit kind of humdrum, aren't they? They're parallel twins. They're not that exciting. They're quite worthy. They're very good. They're decent value, but they're not the last word in excitement. And the ZX-4R should change that. But whether the market is there for it anymore, I don't know. Kawasaki were telling me recently that there's been a lot of interest in this bike, predominantly from older riders who just want one in their collection. But the real acid test will be whether, when it goes on sale at the end of this year or early next year or whatever, once the prices have been announced, how many new riders will actually want to get on that bike and start their biking journey. I've got a feeling it's not going to be as popular as it once was, but who knows, because we've got 22-year-old Joseph that works with us at MCN, and he's just passed his A2 test and he's bought a ZX-R 400, a 2001 vintage, and he absolutely adores it. He thinks it's better looking than current bikes, it's more exciting, more evolving. So you never know, it might attract a lot of new riders. I've ridden that bike of Joseph's, and it's kind of not as gutless as you think. You can kind of happily get along without having to rev it, but you know, you do need to scream it for best results, and it is tiny. I can't fit on it, so you know, I don't know what the dimensions of this Kawasaki will be, but if it's really cramped and really revvy, it might put off a lot of kind of seasoned riders, especially as there's so much other choice now. But the world is definitely a better place for that bike existing. So thank you very much for your question. ES Design, thanks for your question, says, you seem to be suggesting, I'm talking about bike launches here, you seem to be suggesting that it's awkward to suggest negatives in any press launch. Therefore, often you guys just say it wasn't that bad. Why? If it sucks, just say, hey, this bike's shit, right? As a journalist, you of all people need to be blunt. Well, that is dead true. Yeah, that whole bike launch thing where it's awkward, you're made to feel quite, well, when you're at a bike launch, they're there to sell the bike to you, aren't they? They're there to say, you know, sing from the rooftops of how good it is, all its positives and all the rest of it. And sometimes when it isn't, there's been times where you think, oh Jesus, this bike isn't very good. The awkwardness comes from being asked at the time what you think of it. And you do have to be blunt. You know, depends who you are, I suppose, but you know, you have to say something's bad if it's bad. You can't sugarcoat it, because you'll then write your real review. The manufacturer will see it anyway, so you're going to look stupid if you lie on the day and then tell the truth in your report. But yeah, the awkwardness doesn't stop you telling the truth. You know, I've been, where have I been? Maybe two examples. Was the original MT-09, which just had an awful on-off throttle response, really bad, and it understeered like a mofo. And when I mentioned this to Yamaha, they rolled out the engineers that made the bike to sort of challenge me on that. You've got to be very strong-willed for, you know, little old road tester to say something's bad in front of a factory test rider or engineer or whatever, but you just have to do it. And they all know. They know what a bike's like, because they, you know, they're not stupid. And the other time was where I rode a KTM RC390 at a track near Modena with just awful rear shock. You can bounce those things, you know, at standstill. You get off the bike, you can like pull the back end up and down like waving a piece of paper. And again, they sent the chassis engineer over to me to have a word. But yeah, you've got to tell the truth. And I think that there's very few, I can't think of any kind of the core of journalists, experienced journalists that have been around a long time. I would say that nobody is influenced by manufacturer pressure. You know, everybody, we've all been doing it long enough to, you know, not worry about that. You just got to tell the truth, you know, and there's no right or wrong opinion. It's just your opinion, but you've got to tell the truth. And I don't think that, you know, I've seen other comments implying that you go on a press launch, obviously they take you there and they feed you and they put you up in a hotel and all the rest of it. And sometimes they're nice trips, but they don't influence you. I think the only times that maybe some people might give a bike the benefit of the doubt is nothing to do with the manufacturer's peer pressure. Zero to do with that. It's more to do maybe with, you know, your own confidence in being able to, you know, call out the emperor's new clothes, you know, because that's a brave thing to do, isn't it? You know, maybe if there's a less experienced tester in a group and they're surrounded by all these old sort of wizened old hacks, and, you know, if they've got a different opinion to everybody else, it might be a little bit difficult. But, you know, I don't think launches really are the way people perceive them. You know, we're not there for a massive jolly. You're there to ride a bike and review it. You're a critic. You're a bike critic. You know, in some of our cases, I'll go to a launch. I only leave the room to ride the bike or at breakfast. The rest of the time, I'm in there working and doing all, you know, writing everything you need to for my case, for all the Bauer magazines, for MCN, for social media, to do the videos and all that stuff. There's not time to, you know, get wrecked in the bar or whatever. You're just there to do a job. So, yeah, interesting question. But I would say that on the whole, most motorcycle journalists are just truthful about what they see and what they find at a launch. Yeah, but thanks very much for your question. That was a good one. Right, next. From Stu Leyland. Thanks very much, Stu. Neesy, like you, I've worn leathers for years. It has always been a natural choice, and I'm a bit old-fashioned possibly. When you're riding on the road now, what do you wear that gives you the same protection as leathers? I'm still wearing a two-piece suit with a pair of Daytonas. Give us some insight on what's out there now. Thanks, Stu. Well, yeah, I think up until probably mid-noughties, I didn't wear anything other than leathers. But now I don't. I very rarely wear leathers. There's so much good riding kit out there that a lot of the kit gives protection close to, you know, what leathers used to give back in the day. You know, you've got CE approved or CE approving for bike kit, whether that's body armour, whether that's abrasion resistance of the actual material it's made out of. Yeah, leathers now for me just feel really uncomfortable and clunky, and also a little bit embarrassing if you're going somewhere normal. You know, if you've got to pop into a shop or something like that, dressed like a Christmas tree. But I wear generally just jeans and jacket and riding boots, not even full length boots. So I wear them either like the little Alpine Stars boots that look like racing driver, car racing boots, but they're a lot sturdier. Things that look like sort of baseball boots, but with body armour in them. I wear riding jeans, currently wearing Bullet riding jeans, are really, really good. They're really kind of tough. They feel really durable. They've got body armour in them. And then at the top, generally wear an airbag vest, which either goes inside your jacket, and there's one I've got, an Alpine Stars, that goes over the top, which is really easy to put on. And then I'll wear either a textile jacket with body armour in it, leather jacket with body armour, and gloves. Quite a lot of the times I just wear shorty gloves. Maybe I don't feel like I've got to wear leathers now because I don't go around everywhere like I'm on a qualifying lap of a Grand Prix. But generally, yeah, jacket and jeans for me. And I feel nice and safe in the latest generation of jacket and jeans. Yeah, I think the ultimate protection is full leathers with airbags and all the rest of it. But I think you kind of got to weigh up practicality versus kind of safety. In the same way where, you know, if you're going out on a riding holiday or something, you want to lock your bike up, you've got to choose between something that's a lock that's light enough to carry, something that's practical, and then something that's actually going to do its job and save your bike. You can't do both, and you can't do both really with riding kit. If you want to walk around in your kit, if you want it to be comfortable, you've got to sacrifice a little bit of safety. But nowadays you can almost have your cake and eat it now anyway. So thanks very much for your question. Next is Christopher Harlow. Hi Christopher, with a nice Starsky and Hutch car in your profile picture. Love it. Really enjoying this series of videos. Please keep them coming. Well, I plan to. Does being a full-time tester make it difficult choosing a bike to buy? Well, yeah, absolutely, because yeah, you testing bikes all the time. You know what's good and what isn't. But I think you almost want an antidote to the bikes you ride every day. You know, like in any profession, you're not gonna, your profession isn't your hobby normally, and that's the only sort of disadvantage of being a full-time road tester. It kind of spoils your hobby a little bit. I don't know many road testers that just go out for a ride now just for the hell of it. As I don't. You know, the last thing I really want to do after riding all week is go out on a Saturday or Sunday. So, but motorbikes give you pleasure in other ways. So I love riding a bike in my own time to go somewhere, to travel somewhere, to visit somewhere. I love a bike for that. And also for me to do track days and racing and stuff like that. So that's what I use my bikes for in my own time. So yeah, I mean, I've been ridiculed about it many times, and I still think the bike for me is something like a T-Max, just because it's just so easy to ride. You just jump on one, throw your rubbish in the top box or under the seat when you're not using it, and it's got the performance of a motorbike when you want it. If I didn't do this job anymore, then I think my choices would be a bit different, because I'd probably go out for rides, you know, for the hell of it. And in that case, I'd probably have something like I've said it before, Fantic Caballero 500, which are really good fun. GSXR 750 maybe for track days. Tuono just for general riding and touring. GS for big tours, that sort of thing. But right here, right now, I don't really have the appetite for like a proper bike of my own. And you know, other journalists they have classic bikes, they have old bikes to tinker with, which are, you know, completely different to the bikes that they ride every day. But yeah, choosing a bike is always really difficult, but you know, I think it's a T-Max for me every day. But thanks very much for your question. Right, Monaco Racing. Hello, Monica Racing. What was the thought or reasoning for stopping the production of the Triumph 675? I did a video some time ago about the 675. Obviously, sports bikes don't sell in big numbers anymore, do they? That's the simple reason. It's nothing to do with the engine or the technology or anything, because that's still going strong in the Street Triple, isn't it? And other derivatives, obviously in a different size now, 765, or you've got the Tiger 660 and the Trident 660, which are kind of evolved from that 675 engine as well. But you know, the true answer is I did the launch of the Daytona 675R at Cartagena, and I think that was Triumph's last sort of brand new Daytona. They did the 765 MotoGP edition, didn't they? But this was the last sort of full production one. And when they're developing these new bikes, it's kind of normally like a two or 3 year gestation period from, you know, them redesigning the parts and manufacturing and testing and all the rest of it. And they said that when they started the project, it was on the cusp of whether a sports bike would be viable or not, but they went ahead with it. But they said if they'd have made that decision like a year or two later, they definitely would not have carried on with the 675R. So, you know, even back in, so that would have been 2010-11 when they were designing that bike. Even back then, they could see the writing on the wall for sports bikes. And yeah, I suppose sports bikes have evolved into a different thing, because we've ridden the latest Street Triple RS, and that is fantastic. It's an amazing sports bike, really. It's just a naked sports bike. So I suppose sports bikes do live on, but the sort of fully fared race reps haven't, just because they're pretty impractical compared to a lot of bikes now. So, you know, it'd be nice to see Triumph bring out a limited edition proper 765 RS that's got the new engine, the new chassis and all the rest of it, and new electronics. But here's hoping. But thanks very much for your question, Monica Racing. The next one is from the Budget Connoisseur. The absolute love with which you speak about the frame and engine of the 21 Tuono V4 factory is one of the reasons I actually got one. Well, yeah, lucky me, you are lucky. I must have rewatched that review alone more than 20 times to hear you talk about them and see your posture on the bike. Okay, so this is like a riding tips question. What's your point of view on riding, not cornering, posture on the street in terms of elbows, forearms, back and hip, etc.? Well, that's a good question. So I think for normal riding, the way I do it, I think the most important thing is your arms, is not to lock your arms when you're on the bike, always to keep your arms quite soft and quite bent, softly bent arms really, and that just lets you move nice and fluidly on the bike, and it also stops that problem. I know you said not to talk about cornering, but it stops that problem where a lot of riders can go around lefts better than rights, or vice versa. And that was true of the time when I was at the Haslam school, and you could tell which corner they were comfortable on, because the corner they're comfortable on, they had their arms bent as they're leaning into a corner, and the ones they weren't, they had their arms dead straight, and they were kind of, you know, stopping the bike from leaning properly. And that was compounded by their riding position, which made them more stiff and tense, and then that inside arm stays more and more locked. So, you know, that's number one really, is just to keep your arms as bent as you can. I ride with the middle part of my feet on the foot pegs. I don't ride up on my toes, you know, not for normal riding. There's no point really. It's much more comfortable just to keep your feet just flat footed. And then, you know, when you do corner, I just point my toes in. I don't go on the pegs, I just point them in. And then I pivot from bum cheek to bum cheek when I'm going through corners. I don't actually hang off, but I keep my arms bent. I lean into a corner, pivot on that bum cheek, lean into a corner, pivot on that bum cheek. But no kind of big movements, just keep your whole body soft really. With a naked like a Tuono, you know, you are quite upright, and the temptation is to keep your arms quite straight. But yeah, just make a little conscious effort just to lean forward a little bit when you're riding. and it keeps those arms nice and soft, and it just makes everything seem more fluid and easier. So that's what I reckon anyway. And I'm also jealous that you've got a Tuono. Nicely done. Right, next question. From Dar R. Videos always informative, thank you. Quick question about OEM suspension. How does the OEM Ohlins on Ducatis, for example, compare with aftermarket Ohlins? Well, very good question. So when you buy like an S model Ducati, generally got Ohlins on it, hasn't it? You know, would you race on that Ohlins? Well, I think the main difference is, there's probably a couple of differences. Ducati will probably never tell you, but you know, if it's anything like tyres and brakes and stuff like that, aftermarket components are always slightly better quality than OE components, because OE components would generally always be built down to a price or built down to certain philosophies. So a manufacturer would want a part to be more durable, or you know, work in different temperatures or whatever to what they do as an aftermarket version. So with tyres, for example, if you see that you've got Bridgestone S22s on your H2 SX, which I have, you'll actually see that there's a little number next to that, the writing on the sidewall, which says it's an OE version. So it's not the same as the replacement you buy from the shop. That could very well be the case with the Ohlins, because when I've tried proper, you know, aftermarket Ohlins, it's always felt night and day different from any Ohlins you get on a standard road bike. The other big thing to consider is that the springs that a standard road bike comes with may suit you, may not. Obviously, it's going to be a real middle of the road kind of setting that the bike comes in. You know, the first thing you do when you're racing, when you get aftermarket suspension, you don't just throw aftermarket suspension at your bike. You've got to make sure that the spring suits you. And not only suits you, the way you ride and the way the bike behaves on the track. So when I've been racing my S1000RR in the past, you know, you come along to a track, it might be a hard braking track where you need firmer fork springs. It might be a light braking track where you need lighter springs. You don't really stray too far from the rear spring, but if you've got a low grip track, you want slightly softer setup. If you go wet weather riding, softer setup. So, you know, the suspension on a road bike given to you is a massive compromise, huge compromise. And something like a Ducati, it would be a good compromise, especially if it's got electronic suspension, because the damping rate will always be changing as you're riding. You know, if it's a bike that's got automatic rear preload, that helps as well, but you're still going to have average springs. So you know, that's the main difference. I don't think, you know, you see a lot of Ducati MotoGP riders on a V4S Panigales going bloody fast. Whether that is completely standard Ohlins suspension or not, who knows, or whether the springs are changed. But yeah, the quality of Ducati equipment is very, very high. Obviously that's reflected in the price, but I think if you wanted to get your suspension dialed in completely for you, any suspension company would talk about getting your spring rate sorted first, and then all the damping and everything else happens afterwards. But that's a very good question. So thank you very much, Dar R. Right, next. Beverly North, do you consider a real downside that the Tracer 700 and MT-07 don't have a slipper clutch? So thanks very much for your question. A lot of bikes now have got slip and assist clutches where you've got a bit of a slipper clutch kind of action going on. So when you're off the throttle, then a slipper clutch allows more freewheeling, allows more engine braking. And with the slip and assist system, you get a lighter clutch action as well. So a lot of, even though that kind of system is derived from racing bikes, slipper clutches, it helps road bikes as well. It helps them to be more friendly. You know, back in the day, before slipper clutches, you used to read things about, say, Mick Doohan, when he used to ride his Suzuka bikes. He's used to ride in 500cc two-strokes with no engine braking, and then he would get on the four-strokes, the RVF 750s, wouldn't they have been, and actually use the clutch manually himself to act as a slipper clutch. So when you bang down through the gears, you'd slip the clutch and let the bike roll into the corner nice and smoothly without the back jumping around. But obviously slipper clutches now are very, very common. You know, they work hand in hand with engine braking, electronic engine braking controls, where you can set a bike to freewheel into a corner like you've got the clutch fully in, or no assistance at all, where you've got full engine braking and the bike pulls you back into a corner. I think for normal road riding on something like a Tracer 700 or an MT-07, I don't think the lack of a slipper clutch is really a problem. It only becomes a problem on a bike like that if you're very, very aggressive with it. Maybe, you know, if you're going into a slow corner and you whack down through the gears quite aggressively and just dump the clutch, you're going to get a lot of hopping from the back wheel. But you know, it's a good thing to learn to let the clutch out slowly, to let the, you know, just to smooth the engine braking out as you go into a corner anyway. You know, it's not a bad skill to have, just to slip that clutch a little bit during down changes. But I think generally it's not a downside that bikes like that haven't got slipper clutches. Yeah, obviously they cost money, don't they? And on sort of more budget bikes like that, it pushes the price up. But great question, Beverly North. Thank you very much. Right, two more. First one, Mick Briggs. Thanks for your question. Great video as always. Thank you very much. Question for you: did you ever get to ride the Aprilia Cube? If so, what was wrong with it? No, I didn't, fortunately. I mean, there's that famous picture, isn't there, of Colin Edwards, was it Saxon Ring, with his bike on fire shortly before he had to jump off on it. The only special Aprilias I've ridden are World Superbike Aprilias. We've got to ride Biaggi's bike at Aragon, which is pretty cool. But in terms of the Aprilia Cube, the thing that was wrong with it, it was a slice off of a Formula One engine, wasn't it? And I know I've spoken to Jeremy McWilliams in the past, who rode it for a few years. What a legend that man is. But the basic problem is throttle connection. And you know, back then they were experimenting with ride-by-wire. You had an engine which was really, really peaky. So, you know, what everybody wants as a rider is a nice friendly throttle when they're getting on the power. Nice linear, so you can feel the engine, you can feel the tyre through your hand and your body. And that's what gives you confidence to ride fast. If you've got a bike where there doesn't feel like there's good throttle connection, or if there's a delay, or if the power delivery comes on like a light switch, you know, that's when you're going to have big problems. And that's what you don't really ever see as a spectator. When you're watching bikes on TV, they kind of all look the same going around. You can't see what problems the riders have got. You know, and if you've got a really poor throttle connection, you're kind of relying on luck, really, that the bike's going to do what you think it's going to do. The bike's going to grip how you think it's going to grip. So yeah, the best bikes are always the ones with a nice smooth throttle. And when we've been lucky enough to get on proper race bikes before, on factory race bikes, the first thing you notice is how friendly the throttle is at the bottom. Generally, they've got less power than superbikes, road-going superbikes, because you know the engine is dial out all the unwanted power at full lean. So you know, you get on these things, it's just a beautiful and then off you go. Which was probably the polar opposite to the Cube. But no, they were great times, weren't they? Who rode it? Edwards, Shaky, McWilliams. Yeah, I bet they wouldn't want to ride one again. But thanks very much for your question, Mick. And finally, Chris Goes. Thanks very much for your question. If you were racing the 23 S1000RR and could only change 3 things, what would they be, excluding tyres? Well, you wouldn't need to do a lot to that bike. We rode it a few months ago, and the electronics now are at another level. They just let you ride that bike. It feels like a computer game, really. But the things you need to change for racing would be, number 1, suspension. So the standard road bike's got very, very good suspension, electronic suspension, but you really want something like, on my race bike, I've changed to K-Tech suspension. So a good quality fork kit, like I was saying, with the springs to suit you and the bike and the track, and a good quality rear shock, just one that's mechanically adjustable. I raced an HP4 in 2014 with electronic suspension, with Wilbur's suspension units inside, with different electronics to control the suspension, and it was really good, but it's very, very difficult to understand and sometimes not reliable. So yeah, number one would be suspension. Number two, God, what would you change? What have I changed on my bike? The bike already comes with lightweight wheels anyway, so you don't need to do that. Bodywork is an obvious one, isn't it? And exhaust, because the standard road bike's got cats in it. So by putting a race exhaust on there, you could make it a lot lighter, a lot more powerful, change the electronics to, you know, to map it. That's probably the other thing actually, is electronics. The electronics are fantastic on the road bike, but as soon as you start racing, you need them to be a little bit more adjustable. So yeah, three things. You probably need a different ECU, different suspension and exhaust, and I think you could then probably go racing on it. But yeah, phenomenal bike. I've got a 2019 S1000RR, so a little bit older than that, and even that's way better than I am. So that's it for this video. Thank you very, very much for watching. Keep those questions coming in, and I'll see you soon.